Good morning and welcome, a warm welcome to everyone who's joining us. Thank you for joining us this morning. We've got just an hour to dip into a subject which we could all speak about passionately for days. So we're going to whisk through some headlines. The content of today really is based on the eBook, which hopefully that you've seen, had a look at. Today we'll be looking at those top 5 things to focus on if you're attempting to shift the dial on your culture and it's not the time for a huge or embarking on a big change program. So today we're asking Joe and Derek to address some of the common challenges that they see in the hope that these will be challenges that you're also facing, and therefore some of the hints and tips that you'll get today will be useful for you. As Tony said, we'd love to hear your questions. Pop them in the box. We'll probably take most of them at the end, and invariably, if there are some that we don't get to, we'll make sure that you get a full answer from us. We'll write up a full Q&A after the session, so it'll be available together with the recorded session of the webinar this morning. So today we're joined by Joe Geraghty and Derek Bishop, founders and very active directors of Culture Consultancy. Both of them passionate about culture. My job today is going to get them to not say too much, otherwise we'll still be here at 1:30. Between them, they have vast experience across a range of businesses between them, including developing some award-winning culture change programs. Really delighted that we're also joined today by Claire Smith. Morning, Claire. Claire's joining us from Chester, and we worked closely with her while she was bringing about a huge culture change program as the People and Culture Director at Mortgage Advice Bureau. Before we crack on then, let's just say a quick hello from everybody, give them a chance to say hello themselves and to introduce themselves. Joe, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think mostly you covered it there. People who don't know me, my career kind of fell into 2 halves. The first half was 15 years in American investment banks all around the world, a little bit of HR and some on the trading floor on the business side, and then 15 years of co-running Culture Consultancy and really working with all different types of companies to support them with their own culture change.
Thank you. Great. Derek?
So I'm an operations and customer service leader by background and did quite a lot of work in leadership development. So that was the first 19 years of my career. And then as like Joe, I spent the last 15 years really specializing in the culture space because I really felt passionate about the difference culture can make to people, to business performance and organizational impact. So that's what really got me embraced into this.
Thanks, Derek. We see that passion loud and clear in every interaction we have with you. Claire, good morning.
Morning, Paul. Good morning, everybody. Delighted to be here. I am really passionate about people, culture, engagement, and delighted to share the story and experience I've had from the work we did at Mortgage Advice Bureau. But I think having been a beneficiary of organisations who've had award-winning cultures gave me my real kind of, energy to get behind this as a career. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, is focusing on creating the most amazing places to work, which bring out the benefits, as Derek said, of great for the people, but also for the businesses as well. So yeah, really happy to be here this morning.
Thanks, Claire, and we're looking forward to hearing some live examples of what you've done and how well it's worked. We're all keen to dive straight into the detail, but just before we do, Joe, what was your inspiration for putting together the Culture Edge?
I think it was probably even about a year ago, or certainly the beginning of this year. There was a sort of twist in the conversations that I was having with clients, with chief people officers, with business leaders, where they were recognising some culture pains. They were seeing that they needed to do something, but at the same time, and these people are, typically they're people who already understand that culture is that competitive advantage, but they didn't really have the time or the resources or the sort of general bandwidth to do a big culture change program. And they were asking, what can we do? What interventions can we make that will have, give us the greatest impact, the kind of classic bang for your buck type thing? What can we do? And I started thinking about it and pulling that together. And And then, well, fortunately or unfortunately, I sort of had 4 months of being immobile with a back problem. And the upside of that was it gave me quite a lot of time to dig into our research, to look at our insight reports, to look at our culture dashboards, to look at what other reports were coming out in the market. And that really gave me that insight. And I started piecing it together then for clients, saying, actually, if you can just focus on these 5 things, there's lots of other things that you do need to focus on, I dare say, but if you can just focus on these now, you will get some immediate returns and that shift of the dial. So that's really where it came from.
Yeah, great. Thanks. And Derek, in the book, you've outlined, 5 top things to think about, top 5 focus areas. Why these 5 in particular?
I think the key thing is that we're always looking for given the economic environment and the pressures on organisations. It's about there is a lot that you do need to do in terms of an overall program of activity for culture change, but actually where if you are tight on resources or you're under so much pressure, it's like where can you get the greatest traction and what can unlock change rather than waiting for the ideal moment that never comes along. So we identified, as Joe said, from these research and also having looked at, we've had some new clients who've contacted us because their previous culture change hasn't had the lasting change or had the impact. So we've been looking at how we unlock those things, and that's informed the real thinking to, because organizations and leaders want to make the change and realize the benefits at multiple levels, but actually are getting stuck, and how do you unlock that? So that's why we're, through the work, identify these 5 areas around communication, of purpose, and vision and ambition. The whole leadership responsibility about aligning and mobilizing people for the cultural journey. Empowering the managers to unlock that performance and potential, because managers play a key role as well. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, a key thing that really, has been on the agenda for a while, but actually can deliver and achieve so much. And then really about thinking about those where they've not achieved the change or it's not stuck. It's actually how do you really make it stick? So and I think that the thing for us is we always wanted to make a very purposeful and intentional interventions and actions and being really clear that doing activity, for example, events, training, communication, doesn't guarantee you outcomes. So we are constantly challenging ourselves and our clients around that. Okay, what are we actually doing, and how will that actually shift the dial, and not just doing activity for activity's sake. So again, these 5 areas are not a program; they're not a sequence of activities. And some people on the webinar may already be doing work in these areas or have done work in these areas, but the key thing is maybe in the mix of this conversation that actually it might give a different idea or highlight an area that might help or unlock or accelerate the culture journey. So it's not an exhaustive list of what to do for culture change. We're not going to dive into EVPs or changes to employee life cycle. It's like the 5 key areas that to help unlock things given challenges that organizations are facing.
Yeah. Great. Well, let's get into the detail then. Where do we start, Derek?
I guess, one of the key things is really getting anchorage around where you are now. So, it's at some level understanding your current state of play or the current problem, so that, and also what may have been done today. So often, get scenarios where people want to do more activities. We'll just understand what you've done in the past and really where you need to focus your efforts, because the key thing is what you want to do is have very focused efforts to achieve return on investment rather than a broad-based change, because like I said, with the organizational pressures are quite something at the moment. So understanding current culture and really what's influencing what gets done and how, i.e. the actual lived reality of the culture which exists today. Now, in some complex scenarios, it's really critical to understand all those nuances. If you've got multi-brands, you're multi-geography organization, or maybe there's been multiple acquisitions. Those complexities, you'd need to gather the proper insight through doing a cultural assessment. But for many organizations, you'll be surprised how much information and insight you've already got within the organization. And I'd always encourage, I'm not a fan of doing rework. So if you've got internal data, then join it up and connect the dots between it by doing some structured analysis. So whether that's using NPS results, exit interviews, employee engagement data, performance reviews, do some structured analysis about it and then connect it all together. Maybe complement it with some listening sessions or focus groups to get some rich insight from your people. But really, look at what you've got that can give you some insight, and then dig a little bit deeper, get enough to be able to allow you to then get some conclusions and chart out a way forward. So blindly going ahead with some sort of activity without understanding that, I think it is fraught with potential wasted effort, and it horrifies me when I see that, really. So I think at some level, understand what you have today and what's really influencing what gets done and how.
And I think joining that up together, often those information sets sit in very different places within a company, and there's not one person. So sometimes you have to go and fish about for it, or you might have to ask your engagement survey provider to cut the data differently or send you the raw data so that you can really deep dive analyze and not just take the standard report. But then once you've got that and you've got it in one place, then you can, as Derek says, derive some real meaning from it.
Yeah. So assuming that data has made it clear that one of the issues that the organisation is facing is around clear comms, around the purpose and vision. Joe, you talk in the book about how important this is. Why now? Why is purpose more important than ever to employees?
I think there's a few different things. I think most of the research that you'll read will say that it's more important to the younger generations than it ever has been before, which I think is true. But I think there's also an element of, it's the same for purpose, vision and values. I didn't really talk about values too much in the book, but I think it's very easy for all of those things to put words on a page, to think about it more from a sort of an external context or a brand context, and kind of go, this is it, we've badged the website, we've badged our documentation, we know what it is. But if you're truly thinking about purpose from an employee perspective as being your North Star that guides their work, then you need to make it such, right? You need to break it up, chunk it down, explain why it is that. How does it relate to their specific role? How does it relate to what you want from them? So, for example, managers should be able to make really meaningful business and people decisions by understanding what the overarching why of the company is. People should be able to prioritize their work, understand which projects to mothball and which ones to keep, kind of thing. So in order to really have your people sort of mobilized to execute on your strategy and to have that, it needs to be broken down. And so that guiding light is one thing, and having the big messaging, but I think purpose is still quite misunderstood in a lot of places in terms of its real power to engage people in the day-to-day. And I mean, the other thing, just a quick note, is that I also think purpose gets lumped in that thing where it has to be something so meaningful that it's about saving the planet. And at the end of the day, most of the companies that we work with aren't the next Patagonia. Your purpose can still be meaningful and impactful for your people, even just explaining the value that you bring to your customers and clients, the way that it helps you differentiate yourself in the market. That sort of clarity, and then brought down to a level that people really understand for their day-to-day work, I think is crucial.
Yeah. So the bright, colourful posters are great in getting the message across, but we've got to have the content for individuals who understand, well, what does this mean for me? Yeah.
Claire, they only really work. The posters are brilliant, but they only really work if that messaging is backed up with, and how does this apply to what I'm actually doing here today?
Yes. Yeah. Claire, what's your experience from MAB? How did you clarify and communicate purpose in a meaningful way that Joe's describing, so that people really got what it was that they were being expected to do with it?
Yeah, great question. And at MAB, we wanted to create a purpose that everybody could align themselves to. And just building on what Joe said, I talk fondly about Sharon in finance. Sharon is a real person. Sharon worked in finance, did a fantastic job, but could she really join the dots of what she was doing day in, day out to what the business was trying to achieve? So we wanted to create a purpose so that everyone in the business knew the role they had to play. to help the business continue to grow and succeed. And so much so, when we kickstarted the piece of work, we called it Project NASA because of the infamous alleged story of JFK going to NASA headquarters, chatting to a janitor and saying, "What do you do here?" And the answer was, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." So that was kind of, we led with that project name, and we wanted to create a really clear purpose and vision. But I think what was key for us is making sure that that was something that everybody could get behind, and therefore having it created by people for people, and making sure that by bringing people together and using some of the data we already had to understand where we were today. So we brought together an internal group of people of different hierarchy, different tenure, different departments, including Sharon from finance, and brought together an internal group called the Culture Design Group, because in creating a purpose and communicating a purpose, it had to have that backing and buy-in of the people in the business. But I guess the other thing we did as well, we needed to make sure that there was a genuine, authentic backing of the exec, which was part of the work we did as well, to make sure that we could then go on to do the work. So that those are two key things we did to clarify, build, and then communicated through the exec and the internal culture design group. And I guess by getting those two bits in place from the start, that then led us on to having great impact once the project started. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the work we did and how things became embedded later on this morning, I'm sure. But yeah, those are kind of like how we clarified the work we did to kickstart, to look at what the purpose could be and thinking about how everyone can align themselves to it.
Yeah, fabulous, Claire. Thank you. That sort of energy and appetite that employees have at the start can soon fizzle out if they're not seeing that visual leadership from the top. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree.
And Derek, what else? So anything else to add in this area? What specifically can leaders do?
Well, but first of all, I just want to give a little bit of a critical point here. That is because some people on the webinar may be thinking, well, I work in a division or a department of a larger organization, or we can influence or change the organization purpose. You know, we're a subsidiary of a group business elsewhere, so that's all great, but actually, how does that apply to us? And you know, I can't do anything about that. And I guess part of my challenge is therefore is, what can you do that's within your control? And you know, if you are in a department or division or a subsidiary, is what can you do to align and unite your purpose, your people behind something? And so, you know, in that sense, you know, the purpose can be like a small P, but actually, what is your North Star for your division, for your strategic business unit, or for your subsidiary, so that people can get a day-to-day connection? Because I don't want people sort of thinking, oh, I can't do something, when actually you can. So, you know, we worked with a global after-sales division of an organization which has in excess of 100,000 people, okay? And what we did was supported them to set the culture and unite everyone in that division, which was only a few hundred people, okay? It was in the context of over 100,000 people, it's a small division. But it was about being really clear about what would unite and drive their ways of working so that they were maximizing the impact. So I guess that's the same for a subsidiary of a group. And so my encouragement is, don't discount, you know, purpose just being organizational wide. Think about what you can do and that's within your control to bring that unite and align in everybody. So that's just a bit of a sort of a build on from what Joe and Claire were just talking about, really. So
yeah.
So I think there's just a point then from a leadership perspective, and you know, it's about really you've got to make that purpose and that vision or that strategic ambitions the foundation. So don't just do it because it's good practice or you need to have the statement on the wall or the screensavers. As leaders, you need to really create something that you're then going to use and for yourselves as well, and not just, you know, for everybody else's benefit, but how are you going to use it in your decision making? And you know, when you're being presented with proposals for new ideas or business cases, you know, asking the questions around, well, how does this help us fulfill our purpose, and how does this move us closer to our ambitions and our visions? So I think there's something about being really clear that this isn't just for, you know, everybody else in the organization. You as leaders need to like use this as well, and create that real link between purpose and performance, alignment with strategy and objectives, so that there's a real narrative and collective about how people can see how things fit together. I guess what, you know, the final point, which Claire mentioned on this really is involve your people in developing whatever it is from a purpose, vision, ambition point of view. The power of involving people in developing that rather than it being a top-down initiative is just, it pays so much in terms of the impact, engagement, and the progress you'll make. So there's a bit of a thing about actually how to go about doing it, really. So I think for me, those are the key things.
Yeah, fundamental.
Just to add to that, sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that, really, that I think, just to build on what Derek said then, there can be and MAB try to do this themselves on their own, and I think there's two things I'd ask the audience to consider. Bringing in some expertise to help and support you do this, but I guess also just take a step, try not to get carried away by perhaps it being created by experts, perhaps marketing or brand agencies. I think use your people and use culture experts by your side, and maybe try to do it themselves and also try to create it at exec level. And I think it's just being careful of when you're looking to invest in this and create and do this work, involve your people and the right experts to hold your hand.
Yeah, it's definitely about doing it with as opposed to doing it to, isn't it? And that's been part of your success all the way through. Okay, guys, we're nearly halfway.
I was just going to quickly, Paul, pick up on Derek's point about the purpose, you know, at a divisional or a team level, for people to not be afraid of that microculture. You know, they're very much used to be, we used to call them subcultures, and they were always considered very negative and usually toxic, in fact. Whereas I think now, you know, the world is so complex and there are so many sub-entities and different branches and teams that somehow you need to be unique or service a completely different market and need to differentiate themselves, that the microculture is okay. You know, there needs to be some level of uniformity, and how companies do that is slightly different depending on what they're trying to achieve. But there is the uniformity that is required to say this is one culture, but the positive microculture is really okay, and people shouldn't, you know, leaders shouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. Can I just draw all of our attention to the fact that it's 25 past the hour. We're almost halfway through and only a fifth of the way through our content. So remind you to be as succinct as possible. Welcome, more questions coming through. We've got a steady flow of questions, and we'll handle as many of those as we can at the end. So moving on then, we've clearly communicated and got some good understanding around vision and purpose and what that means to me in a way that people can relate to. Let's move on then to look more closely at the important role that leaders play. Claire, can I start with you? What did you get your leadership team to do? How did they play their part in your culture journey?
Yeah, great, thank you. I think it's key to get the buy-in from the start. As I said just then, MAB had tried to do it on their own before. So I presented to the exec team, to the leaders, some of the problems and cracks we'd started to see in the culture, which was looking at that data we already had. So engagement had started to drop, churn had started to increase, Glassdoor scores had started to be impacted, Trustpilot scores. So I think it's making sure you're including the leadership from the start and getting their buy-in, addressing their concerns and talking to them about the ROI they will see and potentially the pitfalls if you don't address it. So I think also what was super helpful was having an exec representative from the start. So then this was always on each board meeting agenda. So that's certainly what helped for us. Hopefully that was succinct enough, yes. But that's certainly what helped for us.
So this is what you're going to get if you do it, but this is what's going to happen if you don't. Let's be really clear about that. Yeah. Thank you. Joe, in the other companies that you've worked with, what are some of the problems that you've encountered here?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think that the role modelling piece is key. You know, sort of you go through all this effort of designing your culture and designing your behaviours and saying this is what leadership behavioural competencies look like, and that role modelling piece is still, I feel like leaders find it quite difficult, even with lots of training and coaching and everything else. And I think some of it is that there's an element of, I do believe in the culture and I believe it's important, but these new behaviours are really for everyone else. This is what everyone else should be doing, and I'm okay. You know, I've got this far in life, I'm all right, and not really appreciating that this applies to them. So really bringing to life, you know, there's a lot of chat about role modelling, but actually doing it is another thing that's quite tricky. I do think there's still quite a lot of ingrained old school leadership sort of ideals, if you like. So, you know, the world of work has changed dramatically in the last few years, and the leadership style that's required now to lead businesses forward is quite different. And even on a super high level, you know, just that kind of, it's not directive and you don't really need to be an expert in the field so much anymore, is much more about understanding your people, harnessing the talent they bring, hiring people that are much smarter than you are, and the sort of leadership in its purest sense, you know, is how can I bring this all together? How do I understand what's going on in my market? How can we adapt? How can we flex? But bringing the people with you on that journey, and that's the bit that I think sometimes gets a bit missed. The other thing that I think is very different these days is inclusive leadership and the concept of psychological safety. And I'm pretty sure most of the listeners on the call are going to be familiar with that. But, you know, if I think about my working days on the trading floor of Lehman Brothers back in the 90s, there was zero psychological safety, I can tell you that for free. And I think, again, it's a leadership quality and skill, I guess, to some extent, that needs to be learned, you know, to provide that environment, to really be listening to what your people want. You know, one of the frustrations of going into somewhere where they've done an engagement survey year after year and it's the 4th year of running it and it pretty much has said the same thing for the last 4 years and nobody's really addressed what's come out of that. Super frustrating and really disengaging for your people, that like, well, you sort of pretend you're listening but you're not really listening to me. If it's things that you really can't change, at least go back and say, well, this is, we can't adapt to this, and actually it's, you know, there's nothing we can do here. But the fact that people are still talking about this means that there's a real, it's, you know, important. Yeah, exactly, something is sort of burning up underneath that. So and then I think, you know, other things, just that ability to delegate, you know, still not a strong skill that a lot of leaders have. You know, how can you bring up your managers? How can you empower them to act? You have to fully delegate, and that's an art form as well. So learning how to do that in a way that the trust is built, you know, that you feel you do trust them to carry out those tasks, is essential. And then I think just the last thing, just leaders really, you know, understanding the risks or innovation opportunities that are in their business, you know, being able to map those out, identify them, map them out, bring them into the day-to-day.
Thanks, Jo. Let's explore that point a little bit further then, just that point about risk and innovation. Derek, what can leaders be doing in this area specifically?
Okay, let me just actually, just before I dive straight in, let's just contextualize. So risk can mean different things in different organizations. So, you know, just a caveat. So in financial services, risk and compliance is about, you know, regulation and customer outcomes. In construction and infrastructure, you're talking about health and safety. So just in terms of risk, let's put it really in the context of innovation. And I think, you know, what leaders can do really is to set what is the risk appetite for failures, for trying new things, you know, the appetite for investment in radical innovation. So that, because contrary to what many people think, actually innovation needs some sort of strategy, a framework, process. It needs some governance around it. It's not just about go off and do loads of things. You need to have some sort of focus around it and be able to channel it. So, but equally, what you want to be doing is involving people in the innovation. So create that ecosystem of innovation capabilities and experience, harness the talent of and insight of people you've got within the organization, and use it as development opportunities as well. So I think there's a certain amount of like, how can you use your talent and your people to fuel your innovation, not just feel like it's down to a certain team or you buy it in from an external agency. It's actually making sure you've got that, intelligence gathering, that adaptability, that collaboration has been some of the key attributes within the DNA of the organization, if you like. So I think specifically on that risk appetite and innovation, those are some of the top things. I think then, so looking more broadly and coming back to Joe's point around the role modeling, what's the impact of us as leaders, is actually increasing over time. So with as leaders, we have 3 times more impact on people and the lived culture, particularly in the moments that matter, than any changes of processes, HR practice, or anything like that. So I think, just in terms of that impact and influence we have as leaders is just rising. So I think from a leadership point of view, it's really about being authentic. So we've had it, in terms of role modeling those behaviors, we've had exec members who've stood up at their cultural immersion events and talk about, look, these are the new behaviors, but we recognize we are not displaying all of these at the moment, but we are actually committed to getting 360 feedback and working on changing the way we do it. So that authenticity to make sure that actually people know that they're committed to it.
That's really helpful, isn't it? To have people stand up and show a little bit of humility. I'm not getting this right. This is what I'm doing about it. Is displaying what we're talking about, living the. Yeah.
Exactly, and it's not a question of you can only do it when it's about being perfect. It's actually being very real, as you say, Paul. And I think with that, building on that is it's the whole comms and engagement and rhythm of two-way engagement. It's not about a broadcast. I know, Paul, this is something you're really passionate about, but investing the time in properly listening to insight and feedback and experiences of people, and that helps you again with that being connected with your people. But sometimes you still do have leadership teams who are not aligned, united, or committed to an agreed set of ambitions or ways of working. And my encouragement is always about being real and honest and hold the mirror up, because as leaders, you really do know when you're not aligned and when it's not so united. But it's just like, we'll just work with it. So I think my challenge is, if it's not right, then put something in place to resolve that, because the ripple effects of that misalignment will just run through the organization, and people do follow what you do, not what you say. So if you're working as leaders in ways that aren't united or working on different agendas, then that will come through quite significantly and have a ripple effect.
I've heard you say many times, remembering you've got eyes on you all the time. The rest of the organization is watching to see, do you mean this? Are you serious this time?
Yeah, exactly. And it does took on that thing. If you've been in an organization for a while, and it's like, this is the latest initiative. Don't worry, it will pass. And I, probably many of us have been there, and I do remember it from my early career. But so that courage and conviction around it is really important, which also then for me leads to this thing around change leadership. And often people talk about change management, but actually for leaders, it's about how you lead, educate, engage, empower, and enable people along that change journey. And that's different to change management. So, and leaders do need to look at themselves in terms of how they lead themselves and how they lead others. But I think that whole change leadership is sort of a skill that is not being used enough in terms of taking people on some sort of change, whether it be cultural change or something else, a digital transformation. That change leadership, I think, is key.
Yeah, plenty to go out there. Thanks, Derek. I'm going to move us on quickly. In the 3rd chapter of the book, Joe, we advocate empowering and preparing managers to unlock performance. What's the real issue here?
One of the things I loved when I was doing part of the research was the CMI's report and the use of the phrase accidental manager, and it just resonated immediately. I just thought that is probably 90% of managers. It's that kind of, I'm good at my job, I understand what I need to do, I'm promoted to manage people, I've had 0 training on how to manage people and get the best out of others. And some people are more natural at it than others. It's fair to say, you know, some people will gravitate towards that, they'll get it, they probably just need a little bit of guidance, and other people it's really not their skill set, but they're stuck in there. So that piece, I think, and we saw a lot of this come to the fore really in lockdown. I think it was really obvious, because I think as a manager you can sort of overcompensate, not necessarily micromanage, but just overcompensate and over-communicate when you're physically with your team. But the minute we were all sent to our separate corners, the whole thing fell down, you know, and became very clear then that managers were not equipped really to manage people. And I think that's continued even since. So I think there's that baseline of, have they really been given the training that they need to be in a position to manage people? And some of that is even basic sort of process stuff around regular one-to-ones. You know, things will fall down and you'll say, well, did you have your one-to-one? And they, well, no, we haven't had it for like 4 months or something. So, you know, the basic one-to-ones, training on having difficult conversations but in real time, so that things don't become a huge issue. You know, there's still a lot of hero to zero, and you sort of think, well, you just hired this guy, you thought they were great, and now all of a sudden you think they're terrible. What happened in between? And that is usually just those conversations have not happened around little niggles that weren't working, or things that were falling through the cracks, or things they weren't doing quite right. And rather than having that upfront conversation right there and then, it's left, and that becomes a bigger issue. So really, you know, that upskilling piece, getting people kind of where they should be. I think one of the things that was quite disheartening was in the Gallup report about managers being more stressed, angry, sad and lonely than the non-people managers, and I was thinking, that's terrible. And I think there's a few things for that as well. I think they're sort of, in some ways, largely neglected as a population. They're not usually a team as such, so they're sort of managing upwards, they're managing downwards, they might have a few peers that they interact with, but then they're not actually a team within the organisation. So they don't have that kind of, how can we make decisions together, how can we lean on each other type piece. So they've got that. Often they sort of just have too much work on their plate, or they don't know how to say no. There's a sort of a lot of work on the side of their desk, as it's called, you know, like off the desk, and you kind of think, well, that isn't your job, but whose job is it? You seem to be picking it up anyway. So there's an overload of work, a kind of bit of overwhelm. So I can see, you know, I read that as well, and I thought, yeah, that's probably fair. I can see where that's coming from. But again, it requires some upskilling and maybe some guardrails internally around managing your own workload and understanding what's yours and what's other people's. Some of it maybe just be a demographics issue, that these people also have caring responsibilities outside of the workplace. You know, they've got parents or children or whatever, so they generally kind of, you know, have more on their plate. And what doesn't help is they're not usually very well connected to the strategic decision making. So, or it's in pockets. You know, you might find that some of the managers are very well informed and their leader will be giving them lots of information from the top, and others are sort of sitting there in the dark, which also doesn't help because it creates that disconnect, you know, within the organisation. And then some people are working blind. So back to my piece about trying to prioritise, you know, help your team prioritise their work and understanding what the best decisions are. They're often making those pretty blind because they're not getting that top-down directive.
Yeah, you're painting a picture there, Jo, that I think an awful lot of people listening to this too can absolutely relate to, because it's something that I know we see an awful lot of. Claire, at MAB, did you have any sad and angry managers that you had to deal with? Did you get them in?
You don't have to name them, Claire. It's okay.
No, great. I'm nodding away furiously with kind of like, Jo, what you're saying there, because I think I was an accidental manager, I think years ago when I got my promotions, and I can resonate with what you're saying there. I think what we learned at MAB was to bring the managers on the journey. And in fact, the last role I had at Movera, we did the same with the work I did there, bringing managers on their journey with you, and we set up a managers club, which was brilliant for managers to come along, a safe space, and talk about a challenge they had. And I think it's about not always running to the people team every time there's an issue that you're frightened to deal with. So we spent a lot of time both at MAB and Movera coaching managers, role playing with them, testing out difficult conversations. But we really helped the managers and supported them themselves with training on the values and the behaviours framework that we created. And leaning into what you said before, Derek, and also you, Joe, we recognised that managers, where they had their strengths, and we really talked about the strengths they had, but also their stretches. So what did they know they weren't that good at? And it might be something like giving recognition. Every single person loves, pretty much everybody loves recognition. So we talk about how we could stretch people. We led masterclasses on areas such as having difficult conversations, creating psychological safety. And then what we also implemented both at MAB and again lastly at Movera was team charters. So getting the managers with their teams, which sort of lends itself to the micro cultures piece, what that team need to do, what do they need to work as a team to help achieve their team mission, which would then feed into the overall business mission and vision and things like that. So that certainly helped, and creating that safe space to make mistakes and learn from them. And that was key, I think, creating that psychological safety.
Getting a real head start on embedding, which we're going to talk about a bit more in a minute. Derek, there's a lot here I'm hearing that seems very familiar from the projects that we work on with a number of CC clients. Can you just summarise quickly for our audience some of the key principles that we use when we're specifically thinking about this management, empowerment, development?
Yeah, I think if we put to one side what those key skills are, I think fundamental is ensuring managers understand and are engaged with what good looks like, because against Joe's backdrop of like accidental managers, you've got to set some real clarity about what does good really look like, and making sure that actually people leadership and management is part of the job and is part of the role. It's not something you just do when you can fit it in. So I think one thing is just fundamentally ensure there is that clear understanding of it and what great looks like. I think then in terms of development, I would really focus it around business priorities, and that could be the cultural change priorities. So if you're introducing a behaviors framework for the first time, focus not just on understanding the framework, but on key skills and the confidence to be able to gather and deliver behavior-based feedback. Because if a manager has never done that before, delivering feedback around behaviors is different about delivering feedback about whether you've met your objectives or not. So I think that done something like that, if it's not done well, can have a massive impact on the employee experience, but also the success of embedding new ways of working. So I think focus the development on the business priorities, and culture change might be one of those. And then the other fundamental thing for me is about the focus on the application of skills. I see far too many initiatives where there's training, and the training, as I mentioned right at the beginning, I'm interested in activity that delivers outcome, and training alone, if the application of learning doesn't come through really quickly and easily. So how do you support managers in applying those new skills and making sure they've got the support to work through the real challenges? So when they do that first feedback session, what support have they got for, oh, this worked, this didn't work, rather than just relying purely on training? How do you apply that? So I think for me, putting aside what the key skills are, those are the key things that we think about setting managers up for success.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Again, just conscious of time, we have 15 minutes left to run, and we've got some really good questions coming through, so I want to try and make some time at the end for those. Let's shift on straight away then to talk about something that I know everybody's really interested in. Joe, you have plenty to share in this arena. You've become a bit of a thought leader in this area. Why is DE&I, and now belonging as well, so important as part of this culture journey and consideration?
Thanks, Paul. I'm not quite sure that I'm a thought leader. I'm definitely not a technical expert. I think that's a lot of people in our team, but I am passionate about moving the dial on D&I in the workplace. And I think the societal impact that you can have from every company just moving the dial a couple of notches in the right direction could be huge. I also think it's helpful that we approach it from the same way that we look at culture. You know, it's really that systemic change point of view. So it's not, we're not in the activity, we've never been in the D&I activity box, because we don't believe in activity for the sake of it. So I think the fact that we're always trying to embed it as part of the culture, we're always trying to make those big shifts, really helps. So that's key. But I think a few of the main issues, and again, this is a topic I could talk about for an hour, so I will try and be brief. The main piece is that there really isn't enough respected and accepted difference in the workplace. So there's a lot of talk about diversity, but when you get under the skin of it, and we look through our inclusion index, or we look through the cultural assessment, or whatever we're working on, that the difference is not there, or it's not even understood. So people will say, well, it's fine, we have cognitive diversity, let's say, without really realizing that cognitive diversity only really comes from different lived experience. It isn't just we come from different countries, and so, but we all grew up in a similar kind of home environment and went to a similar type of university and a similar type of, that's not enough difference. And so that piece about kind of truly understanding, what diversity is and how you bring it in, I think is one of the main issues. The other one is the kind of, people always focus on the recruitment piece. So let's, talk about recruitment for a minute, but it's, when you say, oh, well, we need a diverse talent pool, there, and maybe people genuinely believe that. I think companies often genuinely believe that, but the way they go about it is not really finding that diverse talent through that. So if you just say to your regular recruiter, here's our regular job spec that we always use, I know you know the people, I know people, this is your market, now go and find me some diverse talent, you probably don't get it. Or you do, but on a quite token level, or you're really lucky, you hit the jackpot and you find someone, but it's quite rare. And so I spend a lot of time trying even just to boil job specs down to kind of, but what are the 5 essential, non-negotiable things that this person needs to bring to the table, whether that be skills or experience or whatever. And what does it really not matter? And when you get people to think about it like that, actually, what are your 5 bullet points? What are your 5 things? Just boil it down. And it's hard, right? It's really hard, because they're like, well, I want someone super experienced and they need X years. And you're like, well, no, forget about the years, right? Just what is it that you need them to do? And then it's about really finding those different talent pools, because if you go fishing in the same place, you find the same people, the same types of people. So having to really think outside of that and think, well, where else might they be? If I look at these non-negotiables, where else could I go to find them? So that's that piece, bringing diversity in. And then on the inclusion piece, it's like, well, and what are they going to feel like when they get there? Because if everybody kind of pats themselves on the back, I've seen this a lot, yay, we've hired some diverse talent. And then the people come into the organisation and they look around and they're like, oh, wow, I'm not really sure that I want to be here. And those structures are not in place. There's possibly nobody else that looks like them or thinks like them. There's maybe nobody at that senior level that they can look up to and think, well, this is a place that I'm clearly going to thrive. So again, thinking about that as well. So it's all pieces of the pie, if you like, that need to be considered. And that's before you even get onto the business benefits. I'm really getting leaders to understand that it isn't just a moral, social, essential piece. There are genuine business benefits to having diverse talent in your team, whether that's greater innovation, less risk. There's all sorts of stats around profitability, general success metrics, and that's not clearly understood. So there's a lot of good work that's being done. I'm not saying there's not. There's an awful lot of good work that's been done, but I think there's an awful lot more that needs to be done. And when I look around, the things that I see is still that lack of diversity at the exec board level for sure. You know, that's not there. And if they are there, sometimes they have a very token role and not a meaningful role, which is kind of sad to see. There's still a lot of slow decision making about D&I, you know, about policies, about initiatives. There's sort of a lot of early kind of will, if you like. Oh yeah, it's great, let's do it, a bit of early energy, but actually making those decisions that make a difference to implement things really takes some time. And often it ends up being a kind of, you know, secondary objective, as opposed to this is a core integral part of driving our business forward to make us a successful business. It's a kind of, oh, here's a nice bolt on the side that we should think about because apparently people care about it, you know. So that those pieces, I think there's some big shifts that still need to be made, even though there's some progress happening.
Yeah. Thank you, Jo. Yeah, as you said, something you could talk about for a lot longer, but we do need to move on. Claire, how did you approach this at MAB?
I'll be very succinct, I promise. So I think I absolutely agree with everything Jo said. I think we had a period of fear of getting things wrong, so didn't do anything. And I think what I would share with the audience is start somewhere. Go and look at your data. What's your data telling you? What's your engagement survey telling you? What are your people telling you? And start somewhere. So get your data, look at what it's telling you, and then use your people. And that's certainly, and I think what I also tried to instill both at MAB and my last role is this isn't a HR thing.
Yeah.
It's an everybody thing, but actually you do also need that exec buy-in. So leaning in to where the exec, what they see, what they feel, what they think is really key as well. And don't be afraid to talk to peer networks. We're all in the same boat here. We're all trying to do this for the right reasons. So I think also reaching out, and all, your employees are key. They'll have seen some great things from previous organisations. They'll come up with some ideas, and you want them to start and lead on that with that exec buy-in. So I would say start somewhere, what's your data telling you, involve your people and get that exec buy-in.
Thank you. Thanks, Claire. Jo, you've mentioned the importance of exec buying a number of times. Do you want to add anything briefly to what Claire said there?
No, I mean, you know, Claire's absolutely right. I think it's better to do nothing, better to do something than absolutely nothing, right? So just, you know, raising, the first levels are always educating, raising awareness, you know, what can you do? But I think the sooner you can get to that point where there's an exec commitment that's out there, and it doesn't have to be huge, right? I think that's the other thing to bear in mind, is that a lot of this, it can be very proportionate to the size of business. It can be right for where you are on your journey right now. It doesn't have to be huge levels of ambition if you're not ready for that. But I think stating your ambition and making that commitment to something will just help all of those other things that Claire's talking about really land well, and for people to be engaged in it and believe that something is going to change, that there will be a difference.
Yeah, thank you. With 5 minutes remaining, he said pointedly, apologies that we're probably not now going to get to answer many of these questions, but Derek, a really important part of the whole story here, let's not forget how important it is to make this real on the ground. What do we want to talk about in terms of embedding culture?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, we've already touched on the importance of leadership and the need for them to role model the future culture that's needed and to make the change happen. But culture change shouldn't be viewed as an initiative or be a top-down exercise. And if building on what Jo talked about earlier on about a one-size-fits-all culture won't stick, because it won't connect with everybody, and that whole thing around micro-cultures. So I think, yes, leadership need to role model and lead the way, looking at the change leadership. Yes, you need to look at reviewing the formal influences on the culture, so policies, processes, employee life cycle, and make sure they are reinforcing the desired culture. But I think if you take Jo's point around micro-cultures, it's really about enabling teams to understand what the values and behaviors mean to everyone in this team, and also picking up on Jo's point about inclusion, helping people to be included and involved in what does this translate into values and behaviors to this team. Really like holding a mirror up and saying, well, how well do we currently work and how well do we currently behave in line with those values and behaviours, and then equipping teams, enabling teams to take responsibility for making the changes themselves. And it's not going to all happen at once. It needs to be prioritised, but actually allowing teams and enabling teams to drive their own cultural shift in line with the values and behaviours, but creating the microculture that works for them in alignment with the overall values. And a fundamental to that, therefore, is then measuring that shift, and not just the shift at team level, but also the benefits that the team are realising from that, but also then for the organisation. So for us, this is where like a cultural dashboard and having that link all the way through about how the culture is shifting and what impact is that having on customers, on the people, on organizational performance. So enabling teams, I think, is fundamental, and it not being viewed as a program, because again, you'll have this mindset potentially around, oh, when the program ends, we can stop doing that activity now and go back. So I think it's about equipping teams to be able to sustain that journey and that continuous improvement on the culture, really, so that that actually it can carry on long and the culture can evolve as it needs to support, as I think, the organisation as it moves forward.
Thanks. Quick 60 seconds, bringing it to real life as an example, Claire. How did you go about embedding culture at MAB?
Okay, I'll try my best. Well, as Derek, it's a continuous journey, and it's one that evolves as your business evolves, and it's looking at the whole end-to-end employee journey as well. And I think it also it does evolve as your business grows, and the work we did at MAB then opened the door to start having conversations around ESG, and in particular the S of ESG, and then it progressed to be able to have conversations about, do we look at B Corp framework to be a better, more sustainable business? So it does evolve, the embedding continues, and I think it's constantly having it a conversation piece, team meetings, all hands meetings, quarterly business get-togethers. It's constantly talking about it and making sure that it's just not a project with a start and end date. You have to evolve and grow as your business does. So I think embedding it continuously and constantly talking about it and taking those steps continually to embed it.
Yeah, and you had some fantastic impact measures, didn't you? You were able to actually quantify.
We did.
For us.
Yeah, and I think it's important. So we didn't have much of a cultural dashboard to start, but we had some key figures around engagement and NPS scores and Trustpilot and Glassdoor. And I think when we were about we're 2-3 years into the journey, we're continuing to measure. Glassdoor went up from, I think, 3.1 to 4. What was brilliant was, I think it was 2.5 times more employees would recommend somebody to work at MAB, which then meant you saw a reduction on recruitment agency fees. The NPS score for employees went up something like 146%, something like that. And then I think for me, one of the real great game changers was 22% of job vacancies were filled by internal recommendations. So you could start to see more and more the benefits coming through, increasing on the profits for the business. So yeah, we had a great experience, and it continues. Even though I've left, the legacy has continued. They're continuing to embed and grow because they've got those foundations in place.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so much more that we could be talking about, but I'm sorry to say that we've run out of time. These great questions that we've had coming through, we're going to have a good opportunity to get some good answers back to you on those. Look out on the website. We will have a full Q&A there. Apologies we've not managed to get to your questions, and those who've asked them, thank you so much for doing that. Just before we wrap up, in case people can spare another 60 seconds, Derek and Joe, I wanted to give you a quick opportunity for any final words, literally kind of 10-15 seconds. Joe, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I just think as I'm listening to all of this, I think it's just the alignment piece. How do you join it all up, really? So from right at the top all the way through the organisation, how do you make everything coherent and congruent and pass that information all the way through so that it comes to life and actually really works?
Yes. And Derek?
For me, it would be be about being very intentional and targeted about what you do. Don't just do activity in the hope it will deliver outcomes, and really focus on the embedding of and making it stick, because picking up on Claire's point, it rolls on, and the exponential benefits you get over the longer term. So targeted, really focus on targeted activity, intentional outcomes, not just activity in the hope.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to our audience. Apologies for keeping you 2 minutes longer than we promised to, but we will honour our time commitment. Thanks again for the terrific questions that have come through. We will give these proper consideration and get some answers back to you ASAP. And I really hope that you found these discussions useful, thought-provoking, interesting, and overall helpful if you're embarking on some kind of culture journey within the organisations where you are. If you want to discuss any of your culture challenges, please get in touch. Website details are available, and we will be sending out, as I said, Q&As coming back, and a copy of this session. Thank you for joining us. We wish you a good rest of your day and hope to be in touch soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.